The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe episode 34 Sacred Tension, Holding Difference Without Division. Welcome back to the Unfiltered Human on the Fringe, the space where we explore the emotions, dynamics, and quiet struggles that shape who we are beneath the surface. In our last conversation, we explored the cost of harmony, the ways we sometimes lose ourselves in the pursuit of keeping the peace. Today, we step into a different but related terrain. What happens when we don't collapse into agreement, but instead hold steady in our difference? This episode is about sacred tension, the uncomfortable but vital space between disagreement and division. Too often, we're taught to see difference as a threat, something that fractures relationships and communities. But what if tension could be a bridge, not a wall? What if the very act of staying present with difference became a form of connection in itself? We'll move through stories of dialogue across divides, moments when curiosity kept doors open, and times when silence closed them. We'll also draw from the psychology of tolerance, complexity, and relational resilience, the skills that allow us to sit in discomfort without needing to control or erase it. Because the measure of connection isn't found in how alike we are, but in whether we can remain in a relationship even when we are not. So let's begin. Sacred tension. Holding difference without division disagreement has become something many of us dread. We tiptoe around conversations, afraid of the rupture that might follow, or we harden into positions, convinced that only one side can be right. Yet at the heart of human connection lies difference, perspectives shaped by upbringing, belief, pain, and hope. When we deny that, we flatten the richness of the relationship. Sacred tension isn't about erasing difference, but learning how to hold it without letting it tear us apart. It's about creating space where truth doesn't have to match to be meaningful, and where listening becomes more important than winning. Themes and attributes dialogue over debate, choosing to understand rather than conquer in conversation. Respecting difference, allowing others to hold truths that don't have to mirror your own. Relational courage, staying present in the discomfort of conflict instead of retreating into silence. Balance of integrity and openness, remaining true to yourself while remaining curious about the other. Personal reflection. I remember a time when I found myself in a heated conversation about faith, the existence of God and spirituality with someone close to me. Our perspectives couldn't have been more different. I was questioning structures of control and indoctrination, while they held fast to the traditions that gave them stability. At first, it felt like we were speaking two different languages, each waiting for the other to come around. But instead of pushing harder, I chose to step back and listen. I noticed their need for certainty mirrored the way I once clung to rigid beliefs. And in that recognition, the tension between us softened. We didn't reach an agreement, that was never the point, but we did reach a kind of respect. That experience taught me something. Sacred tension isn't about winning the argument or dissolving difference. It's about allowing space for two truths to sit side by side, without forcing one to eclipse the other. It made me realize that disagreement can be less of a fracture and more of a bridge if you approach it with curiosity rather than combat. Psychological insight psychologists studying conflict dynamics often highlight the distinction between dialogue and debate. Debate is adversarial. It seeks to prove one side right and the other wrong. Dialogue, however, is cooperative. Its aim is mutual understanding, not victory. Bohm, 1996. When we approach difference as a zero-sum game, we engage in what researchers call confirmation bias. Nickerson, 1998. Searching for evidence to protect our position while ignoring what challenges it. My own experience in that conversation about faith revealed this in practice. The moment I shifted from trying to dismantle their certainty to simply hearing it, something in the dynamic changed. I wasn't agreeing with them, but I was acknowledging their humanity. This links with Carl Rogers' theory of unconditional positive regard, creating psychological safety by separating the person from the belief. Sacred tension is exactly that, not collapsing difference but containing it. When two perspectives can stand together without one being forced to dissolve, the relationship becomes stronger. Research into dialogical self-theory, Herman's 2001, suggests we carry multiple voices within us, often contradictory, and part of growth is learning to let them coexist. The same applies in relationships, allowing dissonance to exist without demanding harmony at all costs. Insight prompts. Where in your life do you currently avoid disagreement out of fear of conflict? What might shift if you approach difference with curiosity instead of defense? How does it feel to imagine holding tension without needing resolution? Theory in action. This week, choose one conversation where you sense a difference or disagreement. Instead of preparing counterpoints, prepare questions. When you feel the urge to defend, pause and ask, "Can you tell me more about how you see it?" Notice how the tone changes when the goal is understanding rather than agreement. Belonging on the line. The fear of fractured disagreement doesn't just threaten comfort, it can feel like it threatens belonging. In families, friend groups, communities, and online spaces, we often absorb the message that loyalty equals alignment. So we tuck our differences away to avoid the risk of being pushed to the edge of the circle. The paradox is that membership gained through silence slowly erodes the self we're hoping will be accepted. Sacred tension asks a braver question. Can I stay connected without surrendering what is true for me? Themes and attributes tribal pull, the gravitational force of group identity. Exile anxiety, fear that dissent equals rejection. Value rooted belonging, membership grounded in integrity, not mimicry. Relational bravery, naming difference while signaling care. The circle and the threshold picture a firelit circle on a cold night. Warmth in the center, shadows at the edge. Most people face inward, repeating the same story because it keeps the heat steady. At the threshold stands a person turning outward and inward, holding a different view. If they step in and echo the chorus, they are welcomed. If they speak a new verse, the flames flicker, some shuffle away. But here's the truth. The circle only stays alive when fresh air moves through it. Without a little draft, the fire dulls then dies. Personal reflection. I felt that threshold in community spaces before. There was a group I valued for its support and shared goals, but over time the conversations narrowed. Certain opinions were celebrated, others quietly discouraged. I noticed myself editing my language, rounding off the edges of what I believed, so I wouldn't be that person who complicated things. One evening, I offered a different take, carefully, respectfully, because the topic mattered. The room cooled by a few degrees. A couple of people changed the subject. One friend messaged later to say they wished I'd kept it positive. I went home wondering if I'd risked the whole connection. But the next day, two others reached out to say, "I'm glad you said it. I've been thinking the same." It didn't fix everything, but it taught me this. Belonging anchored in agreement is brittle. Belonging anchored in respect can stretch around difference without splitting. Psychological insight social identity theory, Tajfel and Turner, 1979, explains how strongly we tie self-worth to group membership. Challenge the group's stance, and it can feel like a threat to the self. Neuroscience shows social exclusion activates pain networks similar to physical pain, Eisenberger, 2003, which is why even mild disagreement can feel disproportionately risky. Layered on top is normative conformity, Ash, 1956. We align to avoid rejection, not because we've changed our minds. The alternative is shifting from approval-based belonging to value-based belonging. Philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas suggest that the face of the other is a call to responsibility. Difference isn't a defect, it's an ethical invitation. In practice, this means signaling care and clarity. I'm with you, and I see this differently. That sentence loosens the binary of in or out and opens space for real community. Insight prompts. Where do you soften your views to stay inside a circle? Which communities allow you to disagree without penalty? What value do you refuse to trade for approval? Theory in action. Before your next group conversation, write one sentence that holds care and difference at once. I'm committed to us, and I want to add a perspective that's important to me. Use it as your threshold phrase. Notice who leans in, who leans away, and what that reveals about where genuine belonging lives. The creative potential of tension. Not all tension is a sign that something's wrong. In music, counterpoint creates beauty by letting different melodies move alongside each other. In relationships and teams, disagreement can work the same way if we treat it as generative rather than adversarial. Sacred Tension asks, what might emerge if neither side collapses or conquers? Themes and attributes dialectical growth, progress through held opposites, generative friction, disagreement as raw material, mutual influence, letting positions evolve without erasing, co-creation, building something larger than either view alone, the third sound. When two notes are played together, listeners sometimes report hearing a faint third tone. It isn't there, it's the ear interpreting resonance. Difference in dialogue can create a similar phenomenon. Hold two honest tones long enough, and a third possibility begins to hum, one neither person could have produced alone. Personal reflection. During a stretch of work on a long-form project, I clashed with a collaborator about structure. I wanted a slower arc that gave ideas room to breathe. They argued for a tighter step-by-step frame. Round one felt like a stalemate. Instead of forcing a win, we whiteboarded why each view mattered. My pace protected depth, their pace protected clarity. That reframing turned opposition into design constraints. We ended with a hybrid, layered depth within clear signposts. The piece was stronger than either of our solo versions, and we both learned something about our blind spots. Psychological insight, the old Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, synthesis, captures how tension can move systems forward. In modern research, constructive controversy, Johnson and Johnson, 1979, shows that when people argue positions while preserving relationships, groups make better decisions. Organizational studies also distinguish task conflict about ideas from relationship conflict about people. Gen 1995. The first can improve outcomes, the second corrodes trust. What made my collaboration work was naming the conflict as a task and protecting the bond. We critiqued ideas, not each other's competence or character. That boundary kept our nervous systems out of threat mode long enough for the third sound to emerge. Insight prompts. Where could tension in your life be recast from rupture to resource? What principle of yours protects depth, and what might protect clarity? How can you separate the idea you're critiquing from the person you care about? Theory in action. In your next disagreement, try this sequence. 1. Name what your position protects. 2. Ask what their position protects. 3. Design one hybrid that honors both protections. Even if you don't land on a perfect synthesis, you'll often surface a better question. Curiosity as a nervous system reset difference doesn't only challenge the mind, it jolts the body. Heart rate climbs, breath shortens, and shoulders brace. One reliable way to shift that state is curiosity. A sincere question can move the nervous system from defense to discovery, widening the space in which connection can continue. Themes and attributes embodied curiosity, using questions to soften reactivity. Safe uncertainty, holding the unknown without collapse. Regulated presence, staying in the room when tension rises. Learning posture, prioritizing tell me more over let me win. The door that only opens outward arguments often feel like locked rooms, two people rattling handles that won't turn. Curiosity is the key, but it works differently than we expect. It doesn't pry the other door open, it opens ours. We become more spacious inside, which is what lets the conversation breathe. Personal reflection. A family conversation once veered toward a topic we'd historically avoided. I felt my chest tighten and my counter-arguments stack up. Instead of launching them, I tried. Can you walk me through how you came to that view? As they spoke, I noticed my breath deepen. I didn't end up agreeing, but the physiology changed. The room felt less like a duel, more like a porch, still firm ground, but with room to sit. We left that talk without a winner, yet with more trust than when we started. Psychological insight studies show that curiosity activates dopaminergic circuits tied to learning and reward. Gruber, Gelman, and Ranganath, 2014. Practically, that means a genuine question can flip the brain from threat appraisal to information seeking, easing rigidity. In interpersonal work, the micro skills of active listening, reflect, clarify, summarize, reduce misinterpretation and lower arousal. Positive emotion research, Fredrickson 2001, also suggests that even small moments of openness broaden and build cognitive flexibility, exactly what tense dialogue needs. Curiosity isn't capitulation, it's a regulation. It buys enough bandwidth for nuance to appear and for respect to survive the difference. Insight prompts. What question helps you stay present when you feel defensive? How does your body signal that you've shifted from debate to discovery? With whom could you practice curiosity before the stakes are high? Theory and action. The three question loop in your next tense exchange. Try 1. What matters most to you about this? 2. What do you feel is most misunderstood about your view? 3. Is there one thing in my view that makes sense to you? Then reciprocate. This loop lowers heat while raising mutual understanding. The echo of silence in connection silence doesn't just live inside us. It echoes through the space between us. Every time we withhold a truth, agree when we don't mean it, or smooth over tension, we send signals that shape how others relate to us. Sometimes the echo softens conflict. Other times, it creates a distorted rhythm that keeps everyone slightly out of tune. Themes and attributes co-regulation. How our nervous systems subtly shape each other in dialogue. Invisible permission, the ways silence teaches others what's acceptable. Distorted harmony, when peace on the surface conceals disconnection beneath. Repair through voice, rebuilding trust by aligning inner truth with outward expression. Personal reflection. I once had a friendship where I consistently let the other person make many decisions, where we went, what we did, and who else was involved. At first, I convinced myself I didn't care, but the truth was I did. I just didn't want to risk the friction of saying no. My silence wasn't neutral, it was permission. Over time, they assumed I was easygoing when in reality, I was disappearing. Eventually, resentment built, and it came out sideways, irritation over something as small as dinner choices. To them, it seemed like an overreaction. To me, it was every unsaid no finally catching up. Psychological insight systems theory reminds us that relationships are feedback loops. Silence doesn't erase tension, it reroutes it. Tronic's still face experiment, 1975, showed how even subtle cues like silence or stillness reshape emotional dynamics. More recently, Jack and Dill, 1992, found that chronic self-silencing predicts higher stress and depression. That played out in my friendship. By withholding small truths, I was unconsciously training the other person to assume I didn't have preferences. The rupture wasn't about one dinner. It was about years of tiny silences shaping the loop between us. Repair began when I started naming even small preferences. For example, I prefer tea over coffee. Those early signals slowly rewrote the pattern. Insight prompts. Where have your silences shaped how someone treats you? What loops in your life have been created by things left unsaid? How might naming small truths now prevent bigger ruptures later? Theory and action this week. Practice early signals. Instead of biting your tongue, voice a small preference before it festers. Even something simple like, I'd rather do this. Notice how tiny truths shift the tone of connection. Breaking the silence. When voice becomes liberation, silence can feel protective, but it comes at a cost. Truths we bury eventually resurface, sometimes in anger, in withdrawal, in a sudden burst that changes everything. Breaking silence feels risky, but it's also where authenticity begins to breathe again. Themes and attributes authenticity over agreement, valuing truth over surface harmony. The risk of discomfort, recognizing that growth requires tension. Liberating honesty, the relief of aligning words with inner reality. Repair through courage, how speaking up can reset distorted dynamics. Personal reflection. At one workplace, I became the go-to person for just one more task. At first, I told myself it wasn't worth pushing back. But over time, my evenings vanished under the weight of other people's responsibilities. One day, when yet another favor landed on my desk, I finally said, I'm overloaded. This isn't my responsibility. The words felt heavy, but they also felt like oxygen. The colleague looked startled, maybe annoyed, but I felt relieved. That moment redefined the relationship. I realized breaking the silence didn't have to mean breaking the connection. It could mean rebalancing it. Psychological insight Carl Rogers' concept of congruence, 1961, describes alignment between inner experience and outer expression. When we suppress truth, we live in incongruence, often leading to anxiety, resentment, or burnout. Interpersonal neurobiology also shows that voice and authenticity regulate the nervous system, whereas suppression fuels chronic stress. Siegel, 1999. That workplace moment was my lived congruence. For months, my silence had been breeding stress and resentment. The second I spoke the truth, however clumsy, my inner and outer reality matched. Research calls it congruence. I experienced it as liberation. Insight prompts. Where are you keeping silent in ways that feel unsustainable? What truth feels risky to speak, but is necessary for your well being? If you voiced it, what might shift, not just in the relationship, but in you? Theory in action. This week, write down one truth you've been avoiding. Practice saying it aloud, even privately. When the right moment comes, speak it simply. This matters to me. Notice the relief of congruence. Sacred tension as a practice, sacred tension isn't just a theory, it's a practice. It asks us to keep showing up where difference exists, without retreating into silence or charging into battle. It's the slow art of holding both truth and connection together. Themes and attributes: courageous curiosity, asking questions instead of defending positions. Dual holding, keeping your integrity while staying open to another's truth. Relational repair, learning that ruptures can strengthen when handled with care. Living the tension, accepting that unresolved differences can coexist with respect. Personal reflection. Looking back, the conversations that most changed me weren't the ones where I convinced someone to agree with me. They were the ones where the difference remained, but the relationship held. One of my closest friendships today is built on this principle. We don't share the same worldview, but we share respect. And that has been enough to keep the bridge strong. Psychological insight Bakhtin's concept of dialogism, 1981, suggests that truth doesn't live in isolated voices, but in the space between them. Walsh's, 2016. Research on relational resilience shows that families and communities grow stronger when they can tolerate ambiguity without fracture. I've seen this in a friendship built across differences. Sometimes we clash, sometimes we laugh at how opposite we are. Yet staying in dialogue, asking instead of assuming, listening instead of retreating, has kept the bond alive for years. That's the lived version of what Bakhtin and Walsh describe. Tension not as rupture, but as a relationship in motion. Insight prompts. What relationships in your life already embody sacred tension? Where might curiosity serve you better than certainty? How can you practice staying present in difference without rushing to a resolution? Theory in action this week. In a conversation where you feel different, experiment with staying curious. Replace one statement with a question. Instead of "that's wrong," try "what led you to that view?" Notice how dialogue shifts when you practice holding differences instead of dissolving them. The power of sacred tension. Difference doesn't have to divide us. It can stretch us, refine us, and remind us that truth is rarely simple. Sacred tension isn't about winning or losing, agreeing or erasing. It's about staying present in the space where complexity lives. Not every disagreement will end in harmony, and not every silence will protect peace. But when we learn to hold our ground without closing our hearts, we discover a deeper kind of connection, one that can withstand difference without collapsing under it. You've been listening to The Unfiltered Human on the Fringe. Until next time, stay human, stay awake, and trust that even in tension, there is room for growth. I'm James Miller. If you found value in today's episode, you may also be interested in my broader project, The Inversiverse, a series exploring the hidden architecture of perception, identity, control, and consciousness. Across 20 episodes, The Inversiverse dissects indoctrination, language, media manipulation, dark psychology, belief systems, and the evolution of self in the digital age. You can find all episodes of The Inversiverse on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Substack by searching this place called Earth. These ideas aren't shared to convince you, but to invite you to think, feel, and perceive more consciously in a world designed to keep you distracted. Overview of The Inversiverse, a journey through the mirrors of mind, culture, and control. Episodes 1 to 3 introduce foundational ideas around indoctrination, perception, and manipulation. Episode 4 explores how language, symbols, and cultural norms are used to shape thought. Episode 5 investigates control systems, media narratives, and the illusion of choice. Episodes 6 to 7 dives into collective belief structures and the psychology of mass behavior. Episode 8 focuses on marketing, control theory, game theory, and critical thinking. Episode 9 covers love, relationships, human mating, gender dynamics, and red-blue pill ideologies. Episode 10 unpacks dark psychology, the occult, Satanism, and the dark triad personality types. Episode 11 The Simulated Self examines identity, ego, and the rise of post-human consciousness. Episode 12 The Spell of the Mind inquires into language, illusion, and physiology of thought. Episode 13 Conscious Seduction journeys through persuasion, propaganda, and the unseen forces of the mind. Episode 14 The Myth of Sanity sheds light on madness, genius, and the edge of perception. Episode 15 The Algorithmic Mind probes influence, identity, and invisible architects. Episode 16 The Noise of Knowing reveals overload, obsession, and the age of infinite information. Episode 17 Belief Machines delves further into language, desire, and the engine of reality. Episode 18 Submerged Signals examines how the unseen shapes the self. Episode 19 The Alchemy Within Traces, Food, Frequency, and the Forgotten Intelligence of the Body. Episode 20 Encoded Flesh scrutinizes and opens up to the forgotten language of the body, DNA, and biological consciousness.